Do I look my photogenic best?
Yes.
Otherwise, we can't proceed at all.
Yes, sir. We're rolling.
I'm Irving Singer. The course is problems. No, it's not that problems. It's just philosophy of love in the Western world. There are lots of problems, as you will discover. And we meet between 2 to 5 on Mondays in this room. Anyone have any problem about the room or the date, the hour? Okay, let's stay on that. I've handed out the reading list, and I'll go through each of the items shortly. But there are two matters of business I want to attend to first. I want to know about you so that we can discuss what you're interested in today, and I can get to know you as soon as possible, and you can get to know each other. And also, I distributed something relevant to what is on the reading list for today, September 13th, Introduction, Marriage, Same-Sex, and Opposite Sex. So I want to explain what that is. It is an essay that I wrote a couple of months ago, and that is being published next month as part of what the publishers call the expanded edition of a book of mine entitled Sex, a Philosophical Primer, which is not on your reading list, but this is what I'm giving you is really independent. A Sex Philosophical Primer came out in 2001. There was very little about marriage and virtually nothing on homosexuality or sexual orientation. It's a different kind of book about in the philosophy of sex. It seemed to the publishers, and I agreed with them, that the reprinting of that now would be enhanced by having this essay. The essay is primarily on the problem, the controversy of same-sex marriage that you all know about. And I was glad to put it in because it has such immediate relevance. The rest of the book, and in fact most of my writings, is very speculative and therefore isn't time limited. It isn't time dated. It doesn't have the urgency that this particular question has. One of the things I discuss in the essay on same-sex marriage is that hardly any philosophers, in fact hardly any people, ever discussed this in the past. It's a very, very recent issue. Not many philosophers have talked about the philosophy of sex. Not many philosophers in the 20th and 21st century have talked about the philosophy of love. There's a great literature in philosophy and literature, in creative writing literature about the nature of love, but very little on either sex or sexual orientation. So that what I thought that in this course, instead of going in a boring chronological order, we could very well start with the present and then work back and forth throughout the course in accordance with what you're interested in. In general, I would like this to be a course in what you are interested in. So as soon as I give you a chance, I'm eager to see what you write down on the cards, and then we can talk about that. Before I do that, let me just say a couple of words of introduction, and then I'll continue later on. As with it's all of my courses nowadays, they are expressions of my philosophical development. As you can see, I don't lecture from notes. I don't prepare what I'm going to say. One reason I can do that is because I only teach what I'm myself working on. MIT has been very good to me in letting me avoid bread and butter courses needed to educate the young, which is a cause I believe in, but don't feel any desire to further anymore. I'm allowed to write and to teach exactly what I want. so that what I do right comes out of me. Now, there is one justification for that, which is based on the nature of philosophy. Philosophy is not like other subjects, even in the humanities. Philosophy doesn't have right and wrong answers the way you have in engineering. If you get the wrong answer, the bridge falls down, so you got to get the right answer. There is no right and wrong answer in philosophy, and I extrapolate from that by arguing in various places that there's no right and wrong answer about life or how to live life. Life is not like a mathematical problem. Saying that is already a radical statement in the history of philosophy, because many philosophers, going back to the greatest of all of us, which is Plato, thought that there was a problem in life, and that if you develop reason properly, and one way of developing reason properly is to master mathematics. That's on the ladder that he describes in the Republic. You will get the right answer. And he can intuit it, he thinks, so he can point you in the direction of getting the right answer to the nature of life, and it's not by chance related getting the right answer in mathematics. I don't believe that. I don't know how many people nowadays do believe it. There is a rationalist way of doing philosophy, which shows itself in the way that cognitive science and cognitive science philosophy have developed in the last 20 years. It's different from Plato, but it's based on certain conceptions about the nature of reason and reasoning and rationality that are not unrelated to Plato and to the grand tradition in Western philosophy that comes out of Plato. I don't agree with that. I don't belong to that school of thought. For me, life is not a problem. There's no one solution. And from that, I derive a view that I, like others, call pluralism, which is that there are many solutions to all of life's problems, and living a good life means developing a solution that is acceptable to you and that you can get away with, because if it's acceptable to you, if you're, let's say, a psychopath, but not acceptable to anybody else, then you're going to have troubles with the rest of society. So that you have to not only be a pluralist in general, but pluralist in relationship to as large a gamut of interests that different individuals might have from their own points of view. So it's a very sophisticated kind of pluralism, not because there is any one right answer, but rather because people can work out adequate solutions for themselves, and they can do it well, and they can do it badly. Where does the philosopher come into this? The philosopher's job is to help people to do it well. How do you do it well? One answer to that is given by the father of Socrates, I mean the philosophical father of Socrates, Plato, the philosophical father of Plato, who was Socrates. Socrates never published anything. We only know what others wrote about him, and above all, what Plato did. Socrates would spend his days the way I do, talking, and also without any notes. Only he did it much better. And talking in the Agora, the city square of Athens, to anybody who came along, and working at problems, human problems, practical problems, that he, being a refined thinker, could analyze and help other people to analyze for themselves. The principle he acted on was the job of philosophy is to help us make our ideas clear. Not to provide knowledge, that would make it scientific, which it isn't. Not to convince people of certain desirable actions, that would make it propaganda or proselytizing. Rhetoric was invented about that time and practiced by a school of people who were called philosophers but really weren't, the sophists. The sophists were people who hired themselves out to teach the elect members of the society how to become politically successful. In other words, they were speechwriters or logicians who helped people learn how to make their ideas conveyable to others whom they wanted to influence. Socrates isn't doing that. He's trying to get people to think for themselves, by clarifying their ideas. His point is we all know what reality is because we're immersed in it. But we also have language, and language means that there are ambiguities, that words are hard to understand and very easy to manipulate. And consequently, what we need is someone, a logician of the sort that he was, to help us to straighten out our thinking by clarifying our use of language. Now, there are various techniques that Socrates introduced and then became part of the subject that we call logic. Another part came in with Aristotle and later thinkers. I don't want to go into that right now, except to say that to prepare you for what I do, I think of myself as a disciple of Socrates. Socrates said the most important question is how to live. How to live, how to exist, how to have a good life, how to live with other people, how to live with your family. He had a wife who was notorious as a shrew, and there's one anecdote about her throwing the garbage out the window the way they did in Athens on his head after berating him, and he said, I knew that after all that thunder there would be lightning, or rain, or there would be rain, something like that. I knew that after all that thunder there would be rain. But this is a problem that he's concerned with by getting us to clarify our ideas about what it is to be a family man, to have children, to have a wife. In principle, he doesn't tell you what conclusions to reach. Now, as a matter of fact, if you study the dialogues that are called Socratic dialogues that Plato wrote down, Socrates pretty well knows where he is going and often leads the audience, so to speak, to get to the conclusions that he has in mind. And sometimes it's disingenuous, and there are all sorts of questions one might have about the ultimate honesty of everything Socrates did. But in principle, the idea was to help people to make their ideas clear, because they all knew what reality was. What they didn't know was how to deal with it, given the language we use and the confusions that we as human beings get into all the time. In modern psychology, this is a truism that for all sorts of social and individual reasons, we perceive differently. We use languages differently. We can reach conclusions, and that it's a matter of what's going on in us rather than what's going on in reality. And so the job of the scientist is to work at the structure of these confusions, and the job of the philosopher of the Socratic sort is to help us to clarify our minds, given our inclination to have these confusions. That's what I will be doing with you. That's what I do with all of the 20 books that are listed in that front matter that I gave to you. It's an attempt to work out problems that I face as a thinker. It's not autobiographical, it's not confessional, but it all comes out of me and it comes out of my life. And if somebody knows the clues, the code, he can derive a good deal of my personal life. But that's not what I write about, and that's not what I'm interested in disclosing. I have this past summer written a volume of memoirs. That's all about me, but that's not philosophy. In the philosophy, it's something very different. It is personal. It doesn't purport to be scientific or to have any kind of mathematical certitude, but it might help some people, might not. I think of I think of philosophy as an art form, comparable to poetry or music. It's a conceptual art form. To practice it, you need two ingredients, one of which is to be very highly trained in logic, history of philosophy, academic subjects of the sort that you have to study as a graduate student, as I was at Harvard and Oxford, and that as a graduate student, you have to excel in enough so that you can get a PhD, and you need the PhD as a union card, so that the people who don't have this kind of rational preparation are filtered out automatically. They don't get the union card, and so, you know, it's as if they are astrologers instead of astronomers. And I think that is important. It's not simply a question of talking about feelings that everybody has and life, what is it, in some abstract, general, maybe popularized way. The first need is to talk about it in a highly refined, highly trained way based upon reason of a special sort. That can be taught. In other courses in this department and in every philosophy department in America, they teach you that more explicitly than I do. My hope is that you'll pick it up from me, and in writing your papers, it will show the development of that. I don't presuppose any philosophy courses, any preparation at all, so don't feel embarrassed if you say, oh, but I haven't ever studied logic. You don't need it. The second thing is what it is that makes philosophy into an art form, at least my philosophy. And that is the fact that there is something about the nature of the fine arts, the humanities in general, that lends itself to studying about what life is in general. I want to refine that one little bit more. When I say humanities, I really mean humanistic subjects, because there are some subjects that are called humanities and are humanities, like the study of syntax, or the study of Greek forms of poetry, just the forms. They belong to humanities, but they're not necessarily humanistic. They can be done in a very technical way that doesn't throw much light on what human existence and human interests and human beings are like. The humanistic attitude, which is more often in the humanities but are only a part of the humanities, the humanistic attitude is concerned with the Socratic questions about how to live. Now, this is what is done by all of the arts in their own ways. The arts, too, of course, have two divisions. You can't do music just by humming any tune. You have to learn how to deal with scales. You have to learn a great deal of technical information. I was about to say you have to learn how to read music, but there have been great musicians, Luciano Pavarotti, for instance, the famous opera tenor who he's never learned how to read music. He's still a great tenor. And Irving Berlin, who, the songwriter you've probably heard of, he never learned how to read music. He would improvise on a special piano that was made for him. And Pavarotti listens to the arias he's supposed to sing and learns them, but he doesn't read the music. That's fine if it works. Nevertheless, there are all sorts of technical things about the nature of pitch and about the use of the voice, in the case of Irving Berlin, about chord structures that you have to acquire, else you wouldn't be a musician. At the same time, there's something in music and in poetry and in painting and in architecture and sculpture, rug weaving maybe too. The panorama of arts is much greater than most people realize, that goes beyond the mere technique. If you limit yourself to, you're a composer who limits himself to technique, you're not going to be a great composer. You're more likely to make studies, like studies for the piano, exercises for the piano. You can do that with knowledge of technique. To be a great composer, you really have to have a way of seeing the world, a way of feeling what it is to be a human being who both sees and hears the world, a way of conveying your musical ideas into the feelings of people who may not be musicians, and in that sense conveying your own feelings. All of this is humanistic rather than merely being a branch of the humanities. All right, what you'll be reading, because a lot of what you read is from me, but it's true of the others as well, is a series of humanistic approaches to questions about the nature of love. Well, maybe I should stop right here, because I can talk endlessly, and I do want to get to know you and give you a chance to make out your cards. Oh, you have the cards. Could you follow these instructions? First, put your last name first. No, I'm sorry. First, put philosophy of love. And then after that, 24,261. And after that, fall 2004. On the next line, your last name, written or printed so I can read it easily. Comma, and then your first name. And after that, parenthesis, no, don't put down the parenthesis yet. Any nickname by which you want to be called, if you have one. Otherwise, if you don't want one, don't put it down. I can't see you. Should you change? Because I tend to look to the left for some reason. All right, after that, write your year with a number at MIT or anywhere, wherever you are, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. You're all undergraduates, I assume. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. If you're not at MIT, write. You're at Brandeis, so write Brandeis. You prefer being there rather than there? Where? If you were here, I'd see you more easily. Okay. You have to bring your own chair. Under that, write not the number, but the words to describe your major, electrical engineering, or computer science, or philosophy, I gather, whatever it is. You're ready? Under that, write your local address, if it's like fraternity or dormitory, or if it's not, the street address that you live in. Any place where you can get mail that I may be sending to you, like your papers. Under that, write your telephone numbers in order of accessibility. I mean, some of you work in the lab and do one thing and another and have several phone numbers, or you have cell phones as well as the old-fashioned kind. Write all those numbers down in order of accessibility. Write the one that I most likely reached you at first. Did anyone write down a fraternity with just the Greek letters? Oh, you give the street address. That's good. Oh, your email address. Everybody has an email address. Someday they'll throw away social security numbers and only use email addresses, I think. Or you'll get one at birth. Under that, any courses that you've taken that are in any way remotely related to this one, so I'll get a feeling for what your preparation is. But as I said, you don't need any preparation to get into this course. I think that if you could give me your cards now, I'd like to get to know you. Why don't we start with you, because I couldn't hear everything before.
So I'm an alumni from Brandeis. I graduated last May.
Right.
And I studied philosophy there. And I'm just living in
Start again.
So I graduated from Brandeis. I studied philosophy and European cultural studies. So I'm just sitting in on this course.
That's fine.
And I've
tell me your name.
Dmitry Krasov.
Oh, that's right. I remember now your email message. Okay, Dmitry, what were you looking for? Why are you here? like the philosophical question, right?
Sure, I certainly agree with you. I think philosophy is about trying to get a sense of what the good life is, and I think love is one of the very powerful questions in that. And I've thought about it a lot and read.
Hold on just 1 minute. Can the camera pick it up? Because his voice is very quiet.
I can hear.
It'll come across?
No,
I can speak up.
I can hear you fine.
And therefore, the audience worldwide will be able to hear him. Right? Okay, go ahead.
I was really taken with Plato's account of love in the Symposium in Phaedrus, and I think it's become something of the foundation for my thinking about ethics and other things as well. I can elaborate more sometime later.
You didn't do graduate work at Brandeis, did you?
No.
What did you major in?
Philosophy. And
no, I mean, no, I'm sorry. No, I didn't. No, I don't. You told me that. What I meant was, did you write a thesis, and what did you?
Actually,
what area of philosophy were you concentrating in?
It would be difficult to exactly pin it down to some subject like philosophy of language, but the thesis was called Eros and Language.
Eros and language. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I was looking at this tension between, in German it's Erfahrung and Erlebnis. Maybe you know this distinction.
Yes.
But it's or maybe in the way you put it in your essay, it's erotic love versus marriage, which is kind of a social
versus math.
Marriage.
Marriage. I'm sorry.
Which is kind of a social conception of love or political love.
Do you want to explain the German words for those who may never have heard this?
Yeah, so we actually have this distinction in English. Both of the words translate into English as experience. But what we mean when we say experience, there's actually two things. One is somebody gains experience or has experience of something. For example, if you're a shoemaker or a cameraman, something like this, you have experience, which is a certain system of understanding something, a way of dealing with the world. So that's Erfahrung. Erlebnis is when we say something like, I had an experience, or I went and this was a real experience. And we mean by that actually the opposite. We mean something that was outside of our system of understanding, which we now have to deal with. So eros is maybe the quintessential Erlebnis, or experience. And language is Erfahrung in a lot of ways. And that's what I want.
Well, but poetry would be more like Erlebnis.
You'd be leading to it.
Leading to it, right.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know the work of the great American philosopher John Dewey?
No.
You didn't study that at all? When I was young, he was what was called the dean of American philosophy. And in fact, at Harvard, I wrote my undergraduate thesis, pretty long, 125 pages, I think, long for an undergraduate thesis, on his theory of value. And for me, he was a great model. He was about 90, getting close to 90, I think. He died in his 90s. And he was a man who did everything. He was on social committees. He was very active in daily life. He created schools and, in fact, invented progressive education in America and wrote books about that. So he wrote in philosophy of education, but he also wrote a couple of books on logic, on knowledge, epistemology, on everything, and a great deal on moral philosophy. The reason I mention it is because he also had a book on aesthetics, which he wrote in his middle 70s, I think, and originally as a series of lectures at Harvard. He had most of his life he was a professor at Chicago and then Columbia, where he is still celebrated as a great man. The book on aesthetics is entitled Art as Experience. So it covers both of the two senses that you were mentioning from the German. What he meant by an experience was something exceptional. If you say something is an experience, then it is aesthetic. And being the radical empiricist that he was, one of the great pragmatists in the company with people like William James, he insisted that that was the meaning of aesthetics. Aesthetics wasn't something apart from ordinary life, but rather it was an aspect of ordinary life, of practical existence, that had to be analyzed in ways that were different from anything that was traditionally being done. Aesthetics began in Germany and was treated in very abstract ways until the pragmatists and then 20th century empiricists and people like me started doing something very different. Dewey's idea is that the aesthetic is understood only in terms of something that we could say is an experience. That really is an experience, right? Along the lines of what you were saying. And let me tell you a little anecdote. I gave a lecture at the University of Granada about, 7 or 8 years ago in Spain. And before that, I had, like 2 or 3 days earlier, I had given a lecture in Malaga on the coast. To get from Malaga to Granada, there was only one way, and that was to take the bus. I didn't have a car. I suppose I could have driven, but I took a bus, and the bus goes over the mountains. The Spanish buses are very comfortable and very pleasant. I don't know do any of you know them. They're wide. They're very enjoyable. Plenty of leg room, and I always traveled with my laptop computer and opened it and started what I generally do in my spare time, which is writing a letter to my children, to the family. on these visits, the letters sometimes are 50 pages long, so they're really they're very comprehensive. Anyhow, I was happily working on the computer in this letter to the children, and there was an enormous thunderstorm, a tremendous storm, a really very powerful one that broke out in the middle of the mountains as we were going through them. And I loved that. I felt very safe. We were traveling along. There was no hesitation. It was comfortable. And here was this marvelous display taking place outside. All right. I got to Granada, and I gave a lecture on American philosophy, and in which I talked about George Santayana and also about John Dewey. And in talking about John Dewey, I gave his philosophy of aesthetics and the concept of an experience. And I illustrated by saying, on the bus coming up from Malaga, there was this tremendous thunderstorm, and that was an experience. That was aesthetic. You know, I enjoyed it very much. It was not frightening. It was an experience. After the lecture, one of the professors who had heard me came up and said, I like what you were saying about John Dewey's ideas of the aesthetic and the notion of having an experience, because we in Granada have had a drought for the last 9 months, and that thunderstorm really was an experience. All right, why don't you continue?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the real tensions in this problem is that erlebnis, or gained experience, language, is the means it's the means that you understand what's unfamiliar when you first see it. It's the way you start to understand it through speaking, thinking about it. It also, in some ways, covers up and prevents you from having experience. If you think about...
Well, what is the experience that it prevents you from having?
What about love? That's probably a very good example. For example...
that's like the song in My Fair Lady. What is it? Don't say you love me. Don't don't say anything. Show me. You know that song? I think that's the name of the tune. Show me.
But I mean, for example, people generally have something like this experience, that they know somebody for a very long time, and because they've known this person for a very long time, they have no real new or fresh way of looking at them. They think they understand them. They think they're familiar. And so...
Is that a function of language, though? Is it because of their language that they take the other for granted?
I think it's because they have a language, they think they have a language for describing this person. In other words, if you were to, I think one way of breaking out of this would be to say to them, well, so you think you understand this friend of yours? Well, who are they? And try to make them say it, and then show them that, given their actions, they actually don't have a complete understanding of them. This will lead them into a kind of reflection and intrigue about.
No, I recognize the problem. What I am unclear about still, but we can come back to this, is how it is that language necessarily prevents the expression of authentic love, if that's what we're talking about.
So I guess it's not that it prevents it, it's that belief that you have a complete description of something that prevents it.
Again, I don't see why a complete description, if you could have that, maybe you can't have it. It would prevent it.
Maybe with God would be a good example. When somebody believes they have a complete image of God, like this statue or this book, then it's very hard to say that they really have that they're intrigued with God or in love with God or something like that.
Well, let's not bring God into it yet. Anyhow, that was your undergraduate thesis, yes, on eros and language. It's submitted in philosophy.
No, it was submitted in the European Cultural Studies Department.
There's no one in philosophy who does that sort of thing. Am I right?
University?
At Brandeis.
No, I mean the head of the European Cultural Department was my advisor because.
No, I'm not surprised, and it's not a reflection on Brandeis. I'm the only one at MIT who does it.
Brandeis is very analytic.
There's nobody at Harvard who does what I do, and in most American universities, it has been the case, which is now changing, to my surprise and delight, that questions about the nature of feeling, which includes love, friendship, sex, questions about human relations of those sorts, are not philosophical issues. But you can write about them in your spare time, but if you want to make that into a philosophical theme for your speculations, you're going to endanger your profession. I mean, your professional standing. In other words, you won't get a job if you write a thesis, a PhD thesis on one of those subjects. If you write it on details of cognitive science nowadays, or previously logic, or philosophy of language, that is respectable. You can be dreary, but it will be acceptable and you'll get a job. If you write a brilliant thing, not that it's necessarily to be brilliant, I mean, even if it's a brilliant thing on those areas, you'll have a hard time surviving. So I'm not surprised that there may not be anybody at Brandeis. I haven't heard of anybody at Brandeis who does
I think I might have to go into German literature after all.
Well, people in literature, German above all, maybe because in recent years, in America at least, many of the faculty members are women. They realize the importance of what women can contribute much earlier than many other fields. So at Harvard, I know quite a number of women at MIT who are in German language and literature. And I think partly because German literature lends itself to this, but also because women have been wiser and more sophisticated about these problems, that they would be amenable to dealing with them at that level. The trouble is, women were excluded from philosophy, and consequently, it's only the very most recent group of young women who would do philosophy of love or sex. So there aren't as many as there are going to be, I'm happy to say. Anyhow, go ahead.
What should I say?
No, that was fine. Anyone want to talk to Dmitry about what he just was discussing?
Well, I guess maybe I say also that I taught a class on a very similar subject at MIT for high school kids through the education program. It was on Plato and Shakespeare and Nietzsche's and Hermann Broch's conception of love.
Where do you take this?
I taught it here.
Oh, you taught it?
Yeah, for high school kids.
Oh, high school kids, that's right. Didn't you mention that in
There's an education program here for
Good.
during
Good
the
to you.
summer
I'm
as well.
glad to hear that. Why don't I'll find the card as we go along. Why don't you tell me your name?
Don Jacob. I'm a senior here at MIT. I'm trying to fulfill my concentration requirements, and I thought that the philosophy of love is kind of the most interesting one of all the topics I could have chosen from, and also probably the most pertinent to everyone's
Let me. You're Donald Jenkins.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
That's it. I'm not a colorful, so.
Well, apart from meeting the requirements, what were you hoping to get out of the class?
I don't know, probably a few more I mean, I have my own outlooks on love, but
For instance?
I don't know. You can ask a more specific question.
Have you read anything that would be of interest to the class that you want to talk about?
No.
That's all right. You will talk about it later. I predict.
I'm Veronica.
All right. Just a minute, Veronica. You're in biology.
Yes. And I'm a senior here at MIT as well. And I actually didn't really know anything about philosophy until I came here, and then my freshman year I took the intro philosophy class, and I got really interested, or my spark went off or something. So I've taken a couple of other philosophy classes since then, and then actually the reason I decided to take this class is because at the end of the year, MIT Library sells like books for really cheap, and I found your Pursuit of Love and started reading it over the summer, and then I saw that you were teaching this class, so I thought it would be interesting to be able to talk to you about it.
It's an economy, you don't have to get another copy.
I know, so that's kind of, I guess, mainly the reason that I'm here, just because I was kind of interested by, and then I realized that you were actually teaching the class. So.
Did you say you read the book?
I read about the first half.
Oh, well, okay. The point is, you can read the second half.
Yeah, now it's like, and it'll be fun reading for me.
Also, you will get a context for that book. Later on, in order to show you what's going on, I'll talk about the place of the reading in my case at least, because there are other authors, my own development. The Pursuit of Love, which was published in 1994, has a very special niche. I'll explain that to you later. Do you want to say anything else about philosophy or what you want to get out of it?
Not really, just kind of basic.
No, that's all right.
What intrigued you in your first class in philosophy?
I don't know, I thought that everything, I liked the idea of being able to break down a problem and look at it more just in the way of, I guess, the humanistic feelings and how, everything doesn't have exactly a right answer, because I guess coming here, we're at MIT, and, that is kind of what you get everywhere, the right or the wrong, but the idea that there's so many issues in life that you can look at in so many different ways, and I guess I've just never really been that type of person. I've always been very straightforward, it's like, this is what I'm going to do, this is not what I'm going to do. And the idea that those aren't always the options, I guess, was kind of interesting. And then I took metaphysics, which was...
Which was fine.
That was almost a little bit too much, I guess, for me.
Which means it was too much.
It was, more along the lines of, what is an object and how, and that was even harder for me to grasp. So I think being able to take a class more like this, where it's going to, I guess, go back more towards, dealing with life and, more pertinent things to how we live.
But is that the course that Sally Haslanga teaches? And when she's interested in what an object is, am I wrong in thinking that it's because she's concerned about the nature of objectification, and that women have been objectified, and that's a problem from within feminist philosophy?
She didn't really bring that up too much. I think if she would have done that, I probably would have been able to place that a little bit more, and been able to understand it a little bit more. But no, it was very almost scientific in the way she approached it, and I guess that was kind of what was hard for me. It's because I wasn't looking for that in the class. I was, wanting something a little bit different.
Right. Well, I hope you will find it here. Tell me.
I'm Mireia.
Mireia. Is that the right? Did I say it right? Is it the I doesn't come in? Mireia?
Mireia.
Mireia. I didn't say Mireia.
Yeah.
And is Gonzalez the last name, or Vega?
Well,
Vega, it's hyphenated.
Vega Gonzalez. Well, I don't hyphenate. I'm Hispanic, so it's like Vega's my dad's last name, Gonzalez is my mom's last name,
Yeah.
And women don't change their last name, so I just keep both of their last names as my last name.
Well,
my kids will have my last name in the discussion.
Originally it would have been Vega y Gonzalez, wouldn't it? Is it Mexico the country? Which is your country? We just do both last names, and then when I get married, I would keep both of my last names, and I would do they, my husband's. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't have three. Which country? I'm from Puerto Rico. From where?
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, so that's Americanized already.
Yeah.
No, I think in Spain it would have been Vega y Gonzalez.
Oh, okay.
And you're in mechanical engineering, and you're also in the 4th year.
Yes.
And you've had theology at MIT?
No, I've went to Catholic school since pre-kinder till like I graduated. So once you're past 6th grade, you just do like theology all year, every year until it's your senior year. So you go like very much into like.
Were the schools taught by Jesuits?
Yes. Well, some of them. It was like the parish. The parish was like an open one, so like we had different types, like different order of priests.
In Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, yeah.
The Jesuits are the most learned order in the Catholic Church, and the ones I've known, some of whom were in graduate school with me, were extremely well trained and academically very learned men. And so I always felt that that would be a good way to get a rigorous education if you could somehow expand beyond it. But that would be a matter of faith, and so I'm not, I never resolved that question.
They were very, like, I came here and like every time I'd be like, oh, I went to Catholic school, I was like, oh, you have like definitely like this is the way it is and this can't be that. But they were very liberal thinkers.
Oh, well, yes. In America, Catholicism has been very open and liberal.
I think that we're just like beyond liberal because they're very much into like teaching it for like teenagers, I guess.
Well, in American philosophy, one of the big issues of the 19th and early 20th centuries was the harmonization between science and religion. And it was a problem for the dominant culture, which was Protestant, because of an inherent conflict. If you were religious, then that would tell you the truth, like as for fundamentalists, whereas scientists would say something contradictory. And the Catholics tended to be much broader about that. Their idea was, what's the conflict? Science tells you the truth because the truth is about nature and God created nature, and therefore there is no inherent split. Right. If that's the criterion of being open and less hidebound, the Catholics were much more open than the Protestants were. Now, on other issues like abortion or homosexuality until recent, well, even now, and same-sex marriage, then there is another. Those things don't work out exactly that way. But in terms of the traditional problems in philosophy, the Catholics weren't necessarily as narrow-minded as people think nowadays. And what can we do for you?
Well, I took an intro class, and like it was pretty much like a little bit of everything. And I guess the two things that most interested me were like, the philosophical way of trying to define like good and wrong and all that stuff, and then what they think about like love. So I took ethics, which deals with like.
Did love come into the course?
No, it's just like.
Right, no, I know.
Define good and define that.
All right.
And then
that was 24231 or 2402?
2402 is the intro.
Okay.
It's what is the best way to live. So it's like,
what is the best way to live?
Mm-hmm.
Was that Rafe?
No, it was once.
Casper?
Casper took it.
No. So it was last year.
Right. And then, ethics, and then now I want to like look into like love and all that stuff from like more of a philosophical rather than like a religious standpoint.
Right. Well, it is philosophical, I hope.
Right.
But it's a different kind of philosophy.
Right. So I just wanted like those were the two main issues that interested me when I took the intro class. And I wanted to like, okay, so I took this, then I want to take this one.
Great. Wait a minute, I can predict what your name is. Adriana. Tabonar. Is that right?
It's Tajonar. Tajonar.
Tach.
Yes.
But it looks like a V, but it's pronounced.
Oh, it's a J.
Oh, I see. Takona. Okay. And you're right the year you're here, do you?
Oh, I wrote it.
Oh, 3. You're 3. We were a junior, and you were in biology too. Incidentally, Adriana and Veronica, when you study biology here, it's not human biology, is it? It's molecular?
There are human biology courses, but I think most of the time if you're a pre-med student, you tend to take most of those. But I'm more of a molecular and cell biology.
Right. And behavioral biology, nobody does, I guess.
That kind of ends up falling into psychology almost here.
Oh, you can
or
do...
brain and cognitive sciences.
Oh, so you can do ethology and behavioral biology in somewhere at MIT?
Yes, that's...
Oh, I'm glad.
There's a brain and cognitive science major, and I think they...
That didn't used to be the case. Harvard used to have a huge department of biology that did everything, the whole spectrum, from entomology to ethology and behavioral biology. And MIT didn't. But I'm glad that there are ways in which you can get that at MIT as well now.
Actually, I think the only biology MIT doesn't touch at all is plant biology. For some reason, like plants don't exist here. But everything else is pretty much an area in some way.
My wife majored in biology at Harvard as an undergraduate, and that's where I met her. And she left after she had done her thesis on what is it, Discoideum, I forget the name of the plant that she was working on that didn't interest her or anybody else, I think. She was disgusted and felt that studying biology, the trouble with studying, you used to say, the trouble with studying biology is it doesn't tell you anything about life. And ever since, she has developed a great deal of sophistication about behavioral psychology, primatology, and the ethology, and that for her, and then I acquired the taste and sophistication thanks to her, is what we really look for in biology. And that area of biology certainly has relations to the kind of work that we're doing in this course and that I've devoted my life to, about human feelings and about human relations and different kinds of social responses. So I hope the course will supplement what you're doing. You also do molecular, right? In a way that you'll find beneficial. Do you want to say anything else, Adriana?
Well, last term I took a class about feelings, and I wrote my term paper on quality.
Do you hear the squeak? I apologize. I don't really need this except for some students who are very quiet.
I wrote my term paper on quality and human relationships because we had analyzed quality in different aspects throughout the term. And for my final paper, I chose this topic, and I ended up focusing on friendship and love. And I thought that it was very interesting to see how the concept of love has evolved in different cultures and how it relates to works of art and concepts of religion.
Well, you're in the right place. Where did you take that course?
Here at MIT, it's course 9, Brain and Cognitive Science.
Who taught it?
Stephen Korover.
I don't know. What's the first name again? Stephen Korover.
Yes.
No, he's an old friend of mine. I thought he had retired.
No, he's still teaching.
Oh, I didn't know that. He used to teach a course called Affect.
Yes, it's that one.
He's still doing that. Because I didn't see it in the catalog for several years after he retired. He's come back, I guess.
It's that one, but they changed the name. It has this long name called Affect, Biological, Psychological, and Sociological Aspects of Feelings.
Great. No, we We were in a faculty study group together a few years ago, and I know him very well. Well, I'm glad that he's doing teaching after retirement. He's probably just does that one course.
I think he does also behaviors. I don't remember if behavioral psychology or sociology, one of the two, but I haven't taken that one.
Right. I have a choice between Arthur and Mike. Which are you?
I'm Arthur.
Arthur, okay. Arthur is in physics, second year, and you've had problems with philosophy. What are you looking for?
Well, to be frank, it sounded kind of interesting and it fit my schedule, so.
That's all right.
I'm not really sure. It sounded like an interesting course. I mean, I think at this point of life, I haven't really looked at the concept of love from a philosophical point of view, so it might be interesting.
Right. At this point, let me insert something that I always get around to. We're all interested in love, even if our professions or main interests, sort of in life defines itself differently. If you go if you go to find a job, let's say a summer job, working in a shoe store, and the employer says, "Why do you want to work here?" And you say, "Because I'm interested in the nature of love." You may not get the job, but whatever your interests are, you can also have, and most people, I think, do have an interest in the nature of love. That's one reason why, at a time when I was encouraged not to study this, as I was telling you, I was being a little autobiographical at that point, that this, in the profession, this isn't the way to survive. I was explicitly told by my mentors at Harvard as a graduate student, don't do this, you'll ruin your career. If you study sex, you study love, that won't enable you to survive in the profession. And I did it anyhow, and I've survived. But others have not survived, and I wouldn't recommend it for anybody now as a basis for professional advancement, unless it's like going into the ministry. You've got to do it because you have a mission. You feel you can't do anything else. Or like me, you're so dumb you can't do anything else. But nevertheless, it's something that everybody is interested in. And people generally go into philosophy because they're interested in big problems. They want to know what is the meaning of life. They want to know how to live. They want to have their thinking about the universe enlarged beyond technical studies. So it's one thing to study astronomy, and that's kind of show in the sky. You get fascinated by the colors and the lights and all of that. But it doesn't really answer the big questions. Why is there a sky? Why is there this cosmos? Why is there any cosmos? Or why are we here? Those are the questions people go into philosophy for. Then they realize that they're not going to get any answers, so they become very disillusioned because the study of philosophy hasn't organized itself that way. Well, that, I think, is related to the fact that everyone's interested in love. And in our age, in the last 100 years at least, maybe always, everyone's interested in sex. It's just that that interest has become public and flashed into your face more in America than ever before. I think you mustn't be misled about the fact that so much of American culture, our music, the literature, advertising, above all the advertising, all appeals to some aspect of our sexual interests. It's more true of the United States than ever before, and more true of the last 100 years than ever before. And there never was anybody who made the efforts that Freud did and created a whole field based on his interest in the nature of sex, so it's not surprising. But everybody is always, to some extent, and above all nowadays, everybody is interested in sex. If you take a course in it, you may find that it's either very technical, it's going to be in biology, and then it's mainly what the animals do. And if it's in the humanities, it's not going to be probing, because the people who are trained to probe, which mainly the philosophers, have been discouraged from doing that for fear of losing their livelihood. So that your interest in this, just because it's sex or because it's love, seems to be absolutely wholesome and right. And the failing is not in you, it's in the academic world. In some ways, MIT is better at that, because MIT has defined itself so much out of the mainstream, originally out of the mainstream of universities that are arts and sciences, that it tolerates all sorts of things that other universities wouldn't. But that's a special case. Anyhow, anything in particular that you want to say?
Not really.
Okay, then why don't we go on to Mike?
Okay, I'm a senior here.
In
I
computer science.
Yeah, I did take 24-2 with Professor Wedgwood 2 years ago.
He is now in Oxford.
Yeah, that was his last year, I believe.
Casper Hare replaced him.
Okay, and I took last fall philosophy of science with Professor Maglow, who I think is still around.
Yeah, I'm taking that one now.
Yeah.
Professor who?
Maglow. He's Kofi Maglow.
Oh, Kofi, yeah, right.
So I'm a pretty technical person too. So to finish out my concentration, I could have taken logic or quantum physics or something like that. But I figured I'd take something I don't know anything about. I think a lot of my life experiences so far have demonstrated that whatever I think I know about love is abhorrently wrong. So I thought I would just sort of jump into the pool and
Well, that's a good beginning.
Set that on the table.
That's a good beginning. Socrates was executed on the grounds of seducing the youth of Athens. How? By teaching them false things about the gods, because he investigated questions in religion, though he claims never having denied there are gods. He didn't call himself an atheist, but that was the charge. And second, by misleading the youth of Athens by getting them to examine the nature of the state. And he did that as part of his search for the good life, to get them to think what they should be doing in life. So that was why he was executed. Before he was executed, somebody went to the oracle at Delphos and said, "Who is the wisest man alive?" And the oracle said, "Socrates." And this came back to Athens, and Socrates said he couldn't believe it, that he didn't know anything. How could it be that he would be considered to be the wisest man? And in a sense, his saying that was very sophisticated, because he meant partly what I was saying, that he didn't know any of the scientific truths. That's not the nature of philosophizing. He knew only what everyone knows by being immersed in reality. It's just that he had this ability to examine ideas, and people could use that to live a good life if they wanted to, and if they did it on their own. So he said he was confused. All of this comes out in his speech to the court, which Plato recorded in a dialogue called the Apology. And it's not at all apologetic. Socrates refuses to apologize. He says he's falsely accused. He even says instead of being executed, he should be rewarded. They should build a statue to him, because he helped keep Athens' free spirit alive. In any event, in that description, in the Apology, he says that when he heard what the Delphic oracle had said, he went around to all of the successful people in the society, the poets, the sculptors, the craftsmen, and he asked each of them, tell me, what is it you do? And they didn't know. they knew how to do poetry, but they didn't know what the nature of poetry was. They knew how to make statues, but they didn't know what art was. And Socrates he said these people seem to have a knack, as he called it, but they have no knowledge. They don't know the bases of their important activities. And then he concluded that maybe that's what the Delphic oracle meant, because he knew that he didn't know anything, whereas they thought they knew everything, and therefore they knew nothing. And the one thing he knew was that he did not know